All right, so there was this online discussion that just blew up recently, and it's because it asked a question that, let's be honest, a lot of people were probably thinking, but maybe not saying out loud. It was all about trying to understand this really specific cultural thing that's been happening. So today we're going to break it all down, the evidence they looked at, the theories they came up with, and the data they used to back it all up. Let's dive right in. So, this is it. This was the question that started the whole thing. It was literally the title of the viral video. Now, just to be super clear, our job today isn't to try and answer this question ourselves. Nope. What we are going to do is unpack how the panel in that video tried to answer it. We're looking at their arguments and their evidence. Okay, so where do you even start with a question like that? Well, the panel kicked things off by looking at one single piece of evidence. It was this viral video clip from a protest that, for them, seemed to perfectly capture the exact behavior they were trying to get a handle on. The setup for this clip is pretty straightforward, you know? You've got an interviewer, they walk up to a woman at a protest and ask a really simple question. Why are you here? But her answer, man, her answer is what kicked off this entire investigation for the panel. It was the jumping off point for everything. Just listen to what she says. She's talking about this deep internal conflict. Like she's questioning if she even has a right to be there or a right to be upset at all. And for the panel watching this, that feeling, that confusion and self-criticism was the first really crucial piece of the puzzle they were trying to solve. So, after watching that clip, you could imagine the commentators' minds were racing, right? They immediately started trying to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What's behind this mindset? And they didn't just land on one easy answer. Instead, they threw out a few different initial theories to try and explain it. They basically came up with three main possibilities right off the bat. First up, virtue signaling. You've probably heard this term. It's the idea that she felt this pressure to say the politically correct thing. The second theory was ideological indoctrination. The panel specifically pointed to ideas they said came from critical race theory, which they described as this academic framework that looks at society through a lens of power and race, and suggested it's something being taught in colleges. And the third idea was totally different. It was more of a biological argument. One panelist suggested it's a natural, almost motherly instinct to nurture. But if a woman doesn't have kids, that instinct gets redirected towards these big social causes. But you know what? That third theory, the misdirected nurturing one, got challenged almost immediately. And that's because the panel then watched a second video clip, and this one was way more intense. It seemed to just completely blow that theory out of the water. So get this. The second clip shows a woman who is a mother, and her 6-year-old kid is right there in the car with her, and she's actively confronting federal agents at a live police scene. I mean, she's putting herself and her child in what looks like a really dangerous spot. And this, of course, was a huge problem for that earlier theory, right? Because it suggested this behavior wasn't just coming from women who didn't have kids to nurture. Okay, so faced with this new evidence, the panel had to pivot. They had to adjust their theory. So they came up with a new term for what they were seeing. They called it toxic empathy. The argument they made was that, yeah, this is still a motherly, compassionate instinct at its core, but it's being, well, misapplied. It's an empathy that, in their view, was causing her to prioritize a potential criminal, a stranger, over the immediate safety of her very own child. All right, so at this point in the discussion, the panel decided to zoom out. They realized they couldn't just rely on analyzing a couple of videos. To see if these were just isolated incidents or part of a much bigger trend, they started digging into some large-scale survey data, to see what the numbers had to say about the population as a whole. And what they found was pretty startling. They pulled up a Pew Research study, and look at this statistic. It shows that 56%, more than half of young liberal women, reported having a mental health diagnosis. Now, to put that in perspective, that is more than double the rate for moderate women and conservative women. For the panel, this wasn't just some random number. To them, it was a massive red flag, a huge indicator of some kind of deeper issue. And the data on happiness was, if anything, even more stark. According to the source they cited, only 12% of liberal women said they were completely satisfied with life. Compare that to 37% of conservative women. I mean, that is a huge gap in life satisfaction, and it became a central pillar of the argument the panel was building. And then there was one last piece of data they focused on: loneliness. The numbers they looked at showed that liberal women were over 3 times more likely to say they felt lonely often. And the panel found this really ironic, right? They connected it to this deep feeling of disconnection, which seems so strange for a group that is so deeply engaged in these big, collective social causes.
So what happens when you take everything we've just seen, the confused protester, the mom at the police scene, all of this striking data, and put it all together? Well, the panel tried to synthesize it all into one big overarching theory. One of them pretty bluntly just called it a shitstorm of different factors all coming together at once.
Essentially, their big unified theory is that this is a perfect storm of modern life. They argued it's a combination of a whole bunch of things. It starts, they said, with the education system in colleges promoting a certain social justice ideology. Then you've got social media amplifying it all with algorithms that reward things like narcissism and virtue signaling. They also pointed to other factors like having more money and free time to focus on activism and a social pressure to reject traditional paths like getting married and having a family. And all of this, they argued, leads to a kind of hive mind that can actually make people ignore their own personal instincts.
And that really is where they left it. After laying out all this evidence and all these theories, the panel themselves were left with this one massive fundamental question. Is what we're seeing here a crisis of ideology, something driven by learned ideas? Is it a crisis of biology, where natural instincts are just going haywire? Or is it a crisis of modernity itself, fueled by technology, wealth, and all these new social pressures? They didn't claim to have the final answer. And that's the big question this explainer leaves you to think about too.